Perfect. So it seems like our pod is up, but the actual deployment configuration is still being processed and running. So now I have two things on this dashboard. I have the deployment config, that is the YAML file that I created manually, right? Configured it. And then of course I have my actual applications. However, there is no deployment. Now my application needs to be tied with Jenkins, right? So that's the idea, so that we'll have Jenkins handle the continuous integration and delivery. Perfect. So we have to wait till it actually spins up and recreates, or the deployment is configured. So Jenkins is configured, right? So this entire image is functional before we can actually start to connect to Jenkins. Now while it's actually processing and running, we can take a look at events. And this is kind of nice, gives you a nice idea of what's actually happening. So let's click on view events. It's going to give you a list of all of the events that are happening. And the top two, of course, are the readiness probe, right? And we've done this before. So by default, OpenShift needs to run these health checks, or you can specify to run these health checks as well. So the readiness probe kind of fails, and it happens. It'll probably happen to you as well, unless it just spins it off. But more or less, I'm finding this to be happening on a regular basis. But eventually, it does spin up and it goes through the health checks successfully. But events is a good way to actually take a look at and then kind of scroll down and see all of these events that are happening with your pods. So let's go back to our dashboard, and we'll just give it a few more moments before it actually configures everything correctly. And notice it kind of comes up, right? It's processing, and there we go. So now our pod is configured and everything is working, and our messages disappeared. Awesome. So far so good, right? So we understand this part. We created an application, we configured or used a YAML file to create our Jenkins configuration, and it's using about half of our resources in this plan and about 1 core of CPU, and then it tells you the kilobits in network as well. All right, the next step, once we have these two things on our OpenShift Online, is actually go to our Jenkins environment. So this URL that you see for Jenkins that has been now configured, I'm going to go ahead and click on it, and this will open up a new tab and will allow us to connect to Jenkins. And it tells me log in with OpenShift, so if I can use the credentials to log in to Jenkins platform using OpenShift. So I'm going to click on this button here, and this is going to maybe ask for a couple of more options, such as the service account, because it would use the service account within OpenShift to connect to Jenkins. And here it is. So it says service account Jenkins in project PHP 5.5 is requesting permission to access your account ClayDesk, which is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and click allow selected permissions, and this will log me into the Jenkins dashboard. Perfect. So once you're on the Jenkins dashboard, notice it provides you the PHP 5.5, which is your project name. Okay, so within the Jenkins dashboard, of course, you can see that there are no builds at this point. The project, if I click on it, it's just going to give me the list of the applications or the actual name, which is 5.5, and currently nothing is happening, right? It's not built. All right, perfect. So let's navigate back to our web console for OpenShift. Now in this instance, let's review some of the things before we actually start to build, right? So I'm going to first show you, and let's take a look at the builds, right? So let's click on pipelines from the left navigation pane. And at this point, notice no pipeline builds have run yet for PHP 5.5. And I can view the Jenkins file to see what stages will run. So for example, if I were to click on the Jenkins file, this is the part of the YAML file, right, that we actually created earlier on. So two things Jenkins are going to do: build the image, that's stage first, right? And then stage 2 or second stage is the deploy the application. And notice there's a GitHub webhook URL, right? So recall, that's the URL that we need once we configure our GitHub webhook in GitHub account, so that our code, our source repository, can actually link up with Jenkins, okay, with this pipeline. And that's important. And of course, I'm going to demonstrate that a little later on after we build the pipeline, after we start the pipeline. So what this is going to do is, for example, if I were to click on Start Pipeline right here, it is going to take the source code from GitHub, right, and then start to build the actual pipeline with that code. Now you're probably thinking, why do I need this webhook? Why shouldn't I have this webhook configured prior or right now before starting the pipeline? Well, this is for changes, right? So if the image changes, then you will need this webhook, okay? So in the first instance, to start the pipeline, we already have our PHP application, right, configured. So all we need to do is just start the pipeline. And let's navigate to Jenkins. So you'll see immediate action happening on this dashboard right here, build, right? It's going to start building the actual pipeline. So I'm going to go to the web console, and let's go ahead and take a look at the builds here, just so that you can see. Notice there are no builds at this point. Let's navigate to images, and you'll see just one standard Docker registry image. Perfect. So let's go to our dashboard, click on Jenkins. Pretty straightforward. Our application is here. Everything looks good. So let's start our pipeline. Let's go to pipelines again, and then click on Start Pipeline. Now as soon as I click pipeline, it gives me a notification message, and I can see that it's building, and it's building the image. If I navigate to Jenkins, it should also start the build here as well. Okay, here it is. So it shows up. Takes a lag of a second or so, but it does show up, and it's building the image here as well. So let's go back to OpenShift, and let's wait till it actually builds the image. If I navigate to the dashboard, for instance, and scroll down, notice you will see that the pipelines are actually being built. So if I expand this, scroll down, I can see that the build one for PHP 5.5 project is running, and it kind of shows me the log as well, that it's actually publishing all these layers, and my image is now built in about 43 seconds. Okay, so if your application is large or the images are large, it may take a little bit longer. And it actually deployed the application as well. Fantastic, perfect. So at this point, we have configured our Jenkins pipeline, and we have deployed, built the image and deployed. And remember, these are the two things that we specified in our YAML configuration file. So if I were to bring up my notepad here, notice these are the stages, right? So Jenkins file contains build image and then deploy application. Perfect. Let's minimize this again. There we go. So let's navigate to Jenkins and see what's happening at Jenkins end. So I'm going to click on this, and here it's still building the image, and once it's done, it's going to show me that the image has been built as well. So if I go to the dashboard, for instance, and click on build history, it's going to show me the history of the built image as well. And again, it's still building at this point. So let's go ahead and click on it. It shows me that it's pretty stable. And there we go. So I can see that the image is being built. Go back here. Perfect. So in my stage view, I can actually see that the image is being built. The image has been, the application has been deployed. I can also navigate back to the OpenShift web console and click on view log, right? This is also going to take me to Jenkins as well. And I can now take a look at the console output. I can do it from the left navigation pane from Jenkins or from the web console. So they're pretty integrated, okay? So in this instance, I can take a look at the console output and just kind of make sure everything has been configured properly and all the stages are being created. Perfect. So far so good, right? So now we have our PHP application configured to run on Jenkins pipeline. Okay? Awesome. Next, let's go to GitHub repository. Okay, this is the file. This is the PHP Hello World, the same application that we're actually using. And now I'm going to configure the webhook. And that's important because you need to configure the webhook, in other words, connect to OpenShift, right? So within this project, I need to click on settings in GitHub. And then from the left navigation, there's an option called webhooks. And currently, the webhook is configured. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete this. We don't need this webhook. We will create a new one. So if you were to go to GitHub on your account, you will probably see this, right? Because you've not configured a webhook at this point. So now I need to add the webhook, and that I need the payload URL. And this is important because without this, it's not going to be configured. Where do I go get this payload URL? That's a pop quiz for you guys. Okay, perfect. Yes, we go to our console. We go to our pipelines, right? As soon as I click on my pipeline, and this is my Jenkins pipeline. From within pipeline, I need to actually grab the actual webhook URL. And I've shown you this before, right? So click on the actual PHP 5.5, which is the name of the project, and then you'll see the configuration tab. And if you click on the configuration tab, on the left you'll see the actual config file, the YAML file, part of that for the 2 stages. And then on the right, notice this is our GitHub webhook URL. So I'm just going to copy it. Notice there's also a CLI, right? So if you want to run this job using your command line, you could do so. Just copy this command, OC start build, PHP 5.5, and then so on. So we can run it through the CLI as well. And how about if I assign some quick homework, right? Try doing this, okay? This is your homework. So once I've copied the GitHub webhook URL, I'm going to navigate back to my GitHub account, and then in this field, payload URL, I'm going to paste it. The content type is application JSON because that's what OpenShift uses to connect. If you leave it as application X www form, right, it's not going to work. It's going to give you the error in the webhook. So you need to select application JSON and then click on add webhook. And this is going to connect successfully. Of course, if there's an error, then something went wrong, okay? So once the webhook is configured for the PHP Hello World application, now if I were to change the code, it's going to run through that pipeline to Jenkins. Okay? But before I do that, let's navigate back to our console. Go to our dashboard. And let's scroll down to our actual application. Click on the URL of the application, not Jenkins. And notice you'll see the actual PHP file, right? Which is similar to, if I go to my source repository, index.php within GitHub, it's the same file. Now what happens if I change it? This is one of our last steps in this project, right? So if I change this file and commit the changes, it should run through the entire pipeline for Jenkins, or Jenkins should take control of that. Let's do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just make some changes here, edit the file. So I'm going to say, hello world, happy learning, this is wonderful. Okay, so this is the only change that I did within this file. So once I made the change, I'm going to go ahead and click on commit change. Now as soon as I commit change, I'm going to show it to you what actually happens. It's pretty neat. So let's go ahead and click commit changes. Here we go. Let's navigate to web console, and voila, notice automatically another build number 2 kicks off, and it builds the image and it's going to deploy the application. Awesome. And same thing with the Jenkins dashboard. You'll notice it kicks off another build and deploys the application. Awesome. This is just pretty neat stuff, right? So practice with this, okay? I've shown you a run through the entire workflow from scratch, using Jenkins. Okay, of course we didn't dive more deeper into Jenkins, but this is good enough for you to understand how OpenShift, how you can take the enterprise app, right? You have multiple developers, teams working on their own GitHub accounts and making changes to the code and then running it through the pipelines. So practice with this several times, you get the idea, and I hope this helps, and let's move to the next lesson.